Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today, Donald Trump irreparably destroyed the 80-year-old post-World War II international order. His total abandonment of Ukraine in front of the cameras was on display for the entire world to see. It was a truly historic moment, not in the good way. One that I fear realigned the world order, upending the only foreign policy consensus that most living Americans and Europeans have ever known. Today's Oval Office meeting started to turn ugly when Trump apparently thought that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was not being deferential enough to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I really count on your strong position to stop Putin, and you said that enough with the war. I think that is very important, Ben, to say these words to Putin at the very beginning of war, because he is a killer and terrorist. But I hope that together we can stop him.
I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred.
It only got worse from there as Trump and his vice president lashed out against Zelensky in the Oval Office. We're going to play all 7 minutes of that exchange. It happened earlier today. A lot of people at work, and you've probably seen clips. But the context here is important. Everyone should see how the president and vice president of the United States conducted themselves on the world stage.
He broke this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You haven't been alone.
In this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over In 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of
accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this. Look. If you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't with me. That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have to change.
What if Russia breaks ceasefire? What if Russia breaks peace talks? What do you do then? I understand that it's a heated conversation right now.
What are you saying?
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bathroom. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia, the 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam. And he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff. All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh?
J.D. Vance accused Zelensky of being disrespectful. You heard the whole exchange. Who do you think was being disrespectful? I don't think it's hyperbole to say we as a country have never quite seen anything like this particularly appalling spectacle before. Once the meeting concluded, President Zelensky was kicked out of the White House without even signing the rare earth mineral deal. That's the deal that Trump wanted him to sign. He's been trying to bully him into signing to give away resources. It's the deal that Trump kept calling a raw earth deal. Trump wanted him to strong-arm him into joining on the deal and signing the deal at the White House today. That was the cost of U.S. support. Give us your minerals. We take, and then maybe we'll see what we can do for you. A planned joint press conference between him and President Trump was abruptly canceled. In later remarks to reporters today, Trump let slip the real reason he kicked Zelensky out today.
He doesn't have to stand there and say about Putin this, Putin that, all negative things. He's got to say, I want to make peace. I don't want to fight a war any longer.
He got upset because he was saying negative things about Donald Trump's buddy, mentor, something else, Vladimir Putin. That's what happened. Or, alternately, another way that today looks to me on its face is that it was a planned ambush to effectively jettison Ukraine and complete the switching of sides of the U.S. in line with, again, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's Russia first views. They like Russia. They want the U.S. to be more like Russia. They like Vladimir Putin. They don't like democratic countries. Predictably, Donald Trump's Republican toadies practically tripped over themselves to be the first to lavish praise on this morning's embarrassing display. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was rather quiet during much of the meeting, sitting there sullenly on the couch, found his voice on social media posting, "Thank you, POTUS, for standing up for America in a way that no president has ever had the courage to do before. Thank you for putting America first. America is with you." Meanwhile, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who earlier this month, and I mean like a few weeks ago, on tape in front of the whole world, called Zelensky the ally he, quote, been hoping for all my life, is now also apparently on Team Russia.
I've never been more proud of President Trump for showing the American people in the world you don't trifle with this man. J.D. was awesome. This was a missed opportunity. And the question for me, for the Ukrainian people, I don't know if Zelensky can ever get you to where you want to go with the United States. Either he dramatically changes or you need to get somebody new. If I were him, I would profusely apologize to the way he treated our president and the vice president in the Oval Office. I don't know if you can repair the damage. I don't know if you can ever do a deal with Zelensky anymore.
Let's be clear here. There is a lot, so much to criticize about the past 80 years of American foreign policy. I've been doing a lot of that criticizing myself for most of my time as a professional journalist, commentator. What Donald Trump is building in its wake right now, in front of all of us, with these actions, he's doing things. It's not just words. Where the United States partners itself with authoritarian regimes, sides with Vladimir Putin, against democratic allies, is undoubtedly worse than what we had before. This will have massive consequences for global politics for decades to come. The American-European alliance is effectively over. The North Star of the post-war order, where the United States' strongest alliances are with fellow democracies over authoritarian regimes, has ended. 80 years of diplomacy, born of ashes and 35 million dead, undone by 1.5 men today. I think it makes America weaker, definitely, more vulnerable. It is going to make the world more dangerous as a result, no question. We're already seeing our European allies scramble to fill the void. Leaders from France and Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden, among others, immediately issued strong statements of support for the Ukrainian people who were invaded and have been shot at and getting killed by Russian soldiers. It appears they, too, are waking up to the stark reality that America, under Donald Trump, will no longer be a leader on the world stage.
You're not acting grateful enough. You're not being thankful. Donald Trump, to the leader of Ukraine. Joining our ongoing coverage, former United States Ambassador to the United Nations, former National Security Advisor to President Obama. Ambassador Susan Rice is here. Ambassador, your reaction.
Well, Nicole, obviously it's a very sad day and an embarrassment for the United States on the world stage. But let's step back and analyze what's happened here. I think there's no question that this was a setup. You heard Donald Trump say at the end of that clip you played, this is great television. This was a setup. Volodymyr Zelensky was compelled to agree to a horrible deal that would have sent Ukraine's minerals to the United States without any concrete security guarantees. And yet, because he was trying to improve a relationship with Donald Trump, he came to Washington, he came to the Oval Office, and sat down for a meeting, hat in hand. And soon after he got there, the Vice President of the United States lit into him and started a confrontation. Now, I've been in countless Oval Office meetings with heads of state, presidents and vice presidents, as National Security Advisor, as UN Ambassador, and in other roles. I can tell you that the Vice President or the Secretary of State or anybody else, they don't jump in, hijack a conversation without the express blessing of the President of the United States. So J.D. Vance did that deliberately. Donald Trump knew what he was going to do. And I think, as he said at the end, because he can't, help himself, this was a setup for the cameras. It was a play to his base. But above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin, to show fealty to Vladimir Putin, and to try to humiliate Zelensky. But Zelensky didn't play along with the script, because Zelensky's got dignity and guts, and Zelensky has people that he democratically represents. And as a result, he couldn't sit there in silence as lies were being told about how the war was started, whose responsibility it was, et cetera, et cetera. And he tried to explain what is in fact the case. To suggest that he was not thankful, I can't count the number of times that Zelensky has thanked the American people, the American government, the President of the United States for the critical support that we've provided. It's not about gratitude. It was an effort to humiliate him, to scuttle the U.S.-Ukraine relationship so that Trump no longer feels any obligation to provide support, and to hand U.S. interests and Ukraine and potentially Europe to Putin on a silver platter.
Why?
That's a great question.
Susan, we're gonna unfreeze you. I want to play some more of the president in the Oval Office if we have more of that. We're trying to Ambassador, you're unfrozen?
I hope so.
I say why, and I'll add this. Trump had so much to say about everything he and Putin had been through together. It was like a dictator's version of We Can Do Hard Things, if you're familiar with that podcast. It was insane.
Yeah, Nicole, I think we have to understand that what happened today is really a piece of a larger puzzle. We've seen this building, frankly, since before the Trump returned to office. But literally, so much of what he has done in his first 5 weeks in office have been to the benefit of Russia and China. So let's review the bidding. Threatening our ally, Denmark in Greenland. Starting a trade war with our closest allies and partners. Trying to, create a conflict with Canada and trying to pretend to relegate it to the 51st state. Vance going to Munich and basically trying to blow up the NATO alliance. Pulling the United States Agency for International Development 100% off the map and retreating. Proposing to cut 8% a year from the Department of Defense and literally dismantling the federal government and eviscerating it. That is not in any way, shape, or form in the national security interests of the United States. We are not only alone and alienated from our closest allies in Europe and Asia, as we heard from Turnbull, but worse, we have aligned ourselves completely with Russia, who is aligned with China, North Korea, and Iran. So in 5 weeks, we flipped the script, and we are dangerously isolated and cast our lot with adversaries who truly do not have our interests at heart.
I mean, Andrew Nastios, who was the head of USAID for George W. Bush, was on the program and made the argument that USAID keeps us safe from, it kept us safe from another 9/11 in the years after 9/11, because by stemming catastrophe and human suffering, you also counter extremism in some of the most brutal and hostile corners of the globe. That aid isn't just philanthropic, which seems to be Donald Trump's misunderstanding of it, that aid is one of our most mighty soft power tools, not just for ending human suffering, but for keeping us safe here. Another person described this as the worst 24 hours in modern American history, that we dismantle programs to spare children from dying of malaria and measles, mumps, preventable deaths and diseases, and we dismantle the World Alliance. What is Trump's endgame if you're an adversary or an ally looking at everything he's doing?
I think his endgame is to undermine the security and stability of the United States. And that brings us back to the question that you asked earlier, why? There's no other way to look at this in sum, Nicole, than to see that this is a deliberate and comprehensive weakening of the United States in very short order, from a security point of view, from an economic point of view, from a diplomatic point of view, all to the benefit of our principal adversaries, Russia primarily, and China. And so I think the sooner the American people understand what this is about, what this is what's at stake, the clearer we can be. Now, Vladimir Putin is not popular in the United States. 80% of Americans understand him to be the vicious, cruel dictator that he is. But I'd love to hear more than one Republican in Congress stand up and say that this is not who the United States is. This is not what we signed up for. And more importantly, this is not making America safer. It's, in fact, making us weaker and shrinking in the world. And it is going to make every American less safe.
I mean, before the Oval Office ambush, Republicans were on the record as recently as last week criticizing Putin, calling him what he is, and praising Zelensky. At least one Republican senator, I think it's Mr. Wicker, deleted a tweet today and got in line with almost the same. This is Senator Wicker deleted a tweet highlighting the meeting with Zelensky and the bipartisan group of senators this morning, which he said went swimmingly. It went great. Zelensky was impressive and courageous and brave. And Democrats and Republicans left that meeting with high praise for Zelensky. He deleted this tweet praising Zelensky after Trump and Vance berated him in what you described as a setup. What does that send to the world, that message?
Well, it's tragic. Senator Wicker knows better. So do many of the senators on both sides of the aisle that participated in that meeting earlier.
There's that tweet up on the screen again. This was from this morning. Republican Senator Wicker tweeted, today, several U.S. senators had the opportunity to meet with President Zelensky to discuss Ukraine's future and the mineral deal brokered by President Trump. This is a huge step forward in securing mutual prosperity and peace for Americans and Ukrainians. Senator Wicker tweeted that and then deleted it. Susan Rice.
And deleted it knowing better, as do so many of his Republican colleagues. As well as Democrats, and they are just kowtowing to a leader out of fear and cowardice, and selling out the national interest in the process. For all this talk we've heard for decades about how strong and muscular Republicans are on national security and defense, how they stand for freedom, as Ronald Reagan did, and up for democracy. They have just folded, and they are complicit in the undermining of our national security and our national interests.
What are your worries about what happens now? Now that Putin and Vance have done this, we're at the hinge point, right? It will forever be for Ukraine what happened before that meeting and what happens after. What is the risk now for the Ukrainian people?
Well, I worry about the Ukrainian people. I worry about Europe, and I worry about the wider world. For the Ukrainian people, they have no choice but to continue to do all that they can to defend themselves. They are facing, an extremely powerful and hostile aggressor who now twice has invaded their country, and they're right to believe he'll do it again if given the opportunity. So they're going to have no choice except to continue to defend themselves. And one can hope that there might be some path to patching things up, but I think that's very hard to envision. I don't think Donald Trump wants that. I think he wants the outcome he got today. And that means that Europe and our other democratic allies or erstwhile allies will need to do as much as they possibly can to continue to support Ukraine. People don't recall that Europe already has provided more, billions more in assistance to Ukraine than the United States has, economic and military. They're going to need to continue to carry the load while the United States casts its lot with Vladimir Putin.
Republicans are having a hard time with this. They try to move on to the next question. They express annoyance with their own constituents for asking about it. They get brusque and short in their answers. Or, like Senator Lisa Murkowski, they just purport to be really perplexed, really confused, really scratching my head. They have a hard time with this. All the Republicans do, especially the guy at the top.
You just mentioned Putin, though, and this has been this controversy of the past week. Can you say yes or no whether you have talked to Vladimir Putin since you stopped being president?
Well, I don't comment on that. If I have a relationship, I don't talk about.
You did talk to him.
I don't talk about. No, I don't talk about that.
You talk about talking to Netanyahu.
I don't talk about that. I don't ever say. Why don't you talk about it? I don't ever say about. Why not? What does that mean? I mean, that was right before the election. But it continued after the election. And people get so mad when I play this tape. People get very angry with me when I play this tape. But, honestly, bring it on. It makes me appreciate it all the more because clearly, at least it strikes a nerve. Watch.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been elected?
No. Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that.
Are you going to be talking to Vladimir Putin?
Who?
Have you spoken to him?
I don't want to say.
So you've already spoken to Vladimir Putin?
I don't want to say that.
I don't want to say. I don't want to say. I can't say. Why can't you say? Why can't you say? What precludes you from saying? Listen, it's Friday night. Let's just do this. Let's just cut to the chase here. Let's do a little look-see at the landscape to see why exactly it is so hard for Republicans to deal with this topic. What exactly is so hard for Republicans to talk about? What exactly is it that we are doing, up to and including switching sides in a war? But it's not limited to that. It's all things that don't seem like good news for the United States. That makes them particularly hard to talk about. But nevertheless, with Donald Trump back in the White House, we keep doing these things relentlessly and urgently, and they all cut in the same direction. And it's really hard for Republicans to explain because of what it obviously means. It's clear why they do not want to talk about this stuff, and it gets all the more clear when you just line this stuff up. Let me show you what I mean. Here's one. Donald Trump's handpicked attorney general. She gets sworn in to lead the U.S. Justice Department. On her first day on the job, what is the first thing she does? Headline: U.S. cuts task forces on foreign influence and Russian sanctions. Quote, in a memo sent to staff Wednesday, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi revealed she had disbanded the Foreign Influence Task Force, a unit dedicated to investigating violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Bondi did not elaborate, but figures on the Republican Party's conspiratorial far right have accused the government of abusing FARA to unfairly target political operatives like Paul Manafort, Trump's 2016 campaign chair, who was indicted in a probe into Russian influence in that year's U.S. election. Also on Wednesday, the day of her swearing in, Bondi disbanded Task Force Kleptocapture, an initiative started in 2022 to enforce sanctions against Russia. Who's all that good for? Shutting down the Foreign Influence Task Force, shutting down enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and getting rid of the task force that enforces sanctions against Russia. Who are all those things good for? Why'd we do those things? And so urgently, her first day on the job. Here's another one, which happened that same day. Quote, in a little notice directive on her first day in office, Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered a halt to a years-old federal law enforcement effort to combat secret influence campaigns by China, Russia, and other adversaries that try to curry favor and sow chaos in American politics. Buried on the fourth page of one of 14 policy memos Bondi issued Wednesday, the order disbands the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force. Last year, Justice Department prosecutors and FBI agents exposed an alleged scheme in which Russia-backed media funneled $10 million to a conservative U.S. media company that hired prominent right-wing influencers. Here's how the New York Times bannered that one bluntly. Quote, Trump dismantles government fight against foreign influence operations. Dozens of employees who had been working to fight foreign interference in U.S. elections have been reassigned or forced out. That includes not only the FBI, but also CISA, the cybersecurity division at Homeland Security, which we soon learned the president's top campaign donor had installed a 19-year-old operative who reportedly personally operates websites in Russia and who has been associated with multiple criminal cyber hacking gangs. That's who the president's top campaign donor installed at CISA, giving him full access to systems and data at the U.S. government's cybersecurity agency. A 19-year-old kid with ties to Russia and cybercrime. Who's that good for? How do you explain to your constituents who that's good for and why we are doing that as a country? And what else? What else is hard to explain to ye olde constituents when it comes to that radical switch in the U.S. government that Lisa Murkowski described? How about this? Headline, CIA plans largest mass firing in nearly 50 years. Well, that's good for someone. Who's that good for? That came right after this. Oh, Trump's new hand-picked CIA director sent a list of CIA employees to the White House in an unclassified email. Quote, current officials confirm that the CIA had sent the names of employees to the Office of Personnel Management, complying with an executive order signed by President Trump. Senator Mark Warner, top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, wrote that the sharing of the officers' names was a, quote, disastrous national security development. One former agency officer called the reporting of the names in an unclassified email a, quote, counterintelligence disaster. Ah, yes, a disaster for the United States and for U.S. intelligence in particular. But very good news for someone. Hey, speaking of things that ought to be classified, headline, how Trump's security clearances order could make the U.S. vulnerable. The plan to give temporary security clearances without background checks opens the door to breaches and espionage, experts say. Giving out security clearances without background checks that look for things like, criminal entanglements, lots of debt, anything that they could blackmail you over, or any contacts with foreign governments. To make sure that you're not, secretly working for, we're not doing the background checks anymore. Trump just has ordered that the classified material be made available to whoever he says with no checks. That doesn't seem like good news for the United States. But again, it's good news for someone. How about when they decided that the first agency they would destroy would be USAID? Who cheered the loudest for that? Russia welcomes USAID cuts, calls agency machine for interfering. Yeah, it was fantastic news for someone. No one was seen to benefit more or to be more loudly cheering it on than Vladimir Putin. And that was before the specific news confirmed today that among the projects Trump is explicitly and specifically turning off right now, this week, is the program by which the U.S. helps Ukraine keep its electric grid up and running. even though Russia has repeatedly targeted that electric grid throughout the war. Because Russia's idea of how it wants to win the unprovoked war it declared on our ally is to make the civilian population, including kids and the elderly and hospital patients and everyone, their best idea for how to prosecute that war is to cause them to freeze to death by bombing the electric grid in February. So more than any other evident targeting, they have targeted the electric grid that serves the civilian population in Ukraine. It is the United States that has helped Ukraine masterfully keep the power grid up despite those repeated onslaughts by Russia. Until this week, when Trump just cut it off. Which is good news for someone, right? President dressed up the defense secretary he handpicked off the cast of the Fox and Friends weekend show, put him in a bright blue suit, and sent him to Europe, where he volunteered, unasked, that Ukraine can't be expected to keep all of its own territory. He said that would be, quote, unrealistic. It would be, quote, unrealistic to not let Russia take parts of Ukraine. He then volunteered, unasked, that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Now we've got pro-Trump Republican senators saying, yeah, not just Ukraine won't be allowed in NATO, we ought to get out of NATO too, which of course would collapse NATO. Who would that most benefit? For whom would that be really, really good news? Donald Trump says, let's let Russia back into the G7. Donald Trump is reportedly preparing right now for his own big in-person summit with Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump already started high-level meetings between the Russian and U.S. governments, including an inexplicable 3.5-hour meeting specifically between the president's real estate friend and Vladimir Putin himself. Steve Witkoff came back from that meeting and how'd that go? Went pretty well for someone. Headline, parroting Putin and Trump, Witkoff says Russia was provoked into invading Ukraine. Headline, Trump envoy can't name a single concession Russia will make in peace deal. What does it seem like is going on here? Imagine if a foreign adversary, imagine if the Putin government somehow could just do a thought experiment. Imagine they could somehow exert control or influence over the government of the United States. What do you think the Putin government would have the U.S. government do if he could control it? What kind of headlines would you expect to see about the operations of our government under that kind of a scenario? And what would you expect the news out of the Oval Office and the White House to look like on a day like today?
You met with President Zelensky before he went to the White House today. What can you tell us about that discussion, and what did you think as you watched what happened next?
Well, I was horrified because in the morning we had a bipartisan meeting with President Zelensky, with Senator Graham, Senator Wicker, Senator Grassley. And by the way, through the week, we had meetings with President Macron with a small group of senators led by Senator Thune. And what I kept thinking is, to a T, the Republican senators that have met with these foreign leaders have been very clear that they are supportive of Ukraine, at least the ones that go to the meetings, and that they believe that Vladimir Putin is the dictator and that he started this war. So we start with that. So I thought that President Zelensky, this couldn't have gone better this morning. He was actually looking forward to going over to the White House. He was in good spirits. So when I watch that video, there is one aggressor. There is one side showing disrespect, and that is when J.D. Vance berates a president of a foreign country that is our ally. Zelensky has stood up to a dictator. They have lost hundreds of thousands of people. He did it with 3 simple words the first day of the invasion, when he went down to the street corner, when everyone had counted him out, and said 3 words: "We are here." And that has never changed. The mass graves in Bucha, the burned out apartment buildings that I saw with my own eyes in Irpin, the Ukrainians have been incredibly brave. And so for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to look at him and say, "You never thanked us," that is just an all-out lie, and everyone knows that. So for me, I believe so strongly that we have to stand with Ukraine that I have to figure out, and so do other senators, and I did talk to Republicans tonight, where do we go from here? And there is no choice but to continue on and to find a reset. Our European allies really stood up this week. They've pledged troops, Great Britain and France, to work with Ukraine in large numbers to form a security line once an agreement is reached. The Italian prime minister, who is very conservative, went to Trump's inauguration, has called for a summit in the last 5 hours. She has stood with Ukraine. So I think you see others standing up, as you just noted, with President Zelensky, and I hope we see more of that in the next few days. We have no choice but to move forward.
Senator, let me pick up on something you just said. You said you've talked to your Republican counterparts tonight. What are they saying?
Well, there are, I've talked to 2, and they would like to get this back on track. I don't think that they will be saying that publicly right now. I don't know when, but we really don't have a choice when dealing with Donald Trump. I listened to the entire Marco Rubio interview tonight, and while I completely disagreed with him as he berated again Zelensky, I just ask your viewers to watch that tape. Watch J.D. Vance's body language. Watch Zelensky saying, "Now, could I answer that? Do you mind?" He was polite. And it's not even English. It's not obviously his first language. But I believe we're going to have to move forward and find a way forward. It's just too much bloodshed. And Vladimir Putin, who has, his regime has shot down passenger planes. He is someone who has imprisoned and killed political opponents. He is someone who has killed journalists. He will not stop. And Zelensky's point tonight in that meeting was simple. He said, we need a strong ironclad security agreement, which is going to mean troops and help, because whether it was the Minsk agreement or other ones, Putin has violated them. And that was the simple point he was making when J.D. Vance claimed he was being disrespectful. It is a point that numerous Republicans have made throughout the week as these European leaders have visited.
Senator, is the bottom line here that Russian President Vladimir Putin basically just wants Zelensky out of these talks, away from the negotiating table?
I mean, Putin is a strong man. He's a bully, right? And what they did today, and I just refuse to count out Ukraine, and I refuse to count out the possibility of our country still being involved in peace negotiations, because I know how strongly so many people feel about this, regardless of political party. But what they did today was undermined him. They undermined the strength of his army and his people. Afterwards, you were noting what the Russians said. The former Russian president said that they treated him as an insolent pig who finally got his slap down. Is that the result that they wanted? That maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe it was an ambush, or maybe they're just so hot-headed that they get into the meeting and they can't help themselves. Whatever it is, it's bad. And we must have a reset, and there are Republicans must stand up with us, and a number of them have in the past, and say we must move forward and stand with Ukraine.
Well, Senator Klobuchar, I hope you are right. We'll keep our eyes open to see that happen.
Senator, Jonathan, I don't know if it will happen. I'm saying it's our only hope, because otherwise we're going to abandon this, and Vladimir Putin is going to march right through Ukraine and the next country and the next country. We have to go at this from a position of strength and not from a position of surrender.